Hello everyone, and welcome to this Asia Edit Author Success webinar. I'm Trevor Lane, an education consultant at Asia Edit. Now, I've been training researchers to publish and present their work around the world for more than 25 years. And so in this webinar, I'll be giving you some tips on how to talk about your research in English in international conferences. Now, this webinar follows an earlier one on preparing the artwork for posters and slides, which can be found on the Asia Edit website. So do go there after this webinar to find out what was in part one. So in this hour, we'll be looking at how to start well and capture the audience's attention, and then how to keep the audience interested and engaged, and then my top tips for confidently talking about your work and answering questions. The final 10 minutes or so will be reserved for a Q&A, question and answer session, when I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have. Now, to make this webinar more interactive, I'll be asking you to raise and lower your virtual hand and to type responses into the chat box when I ask you some questions. But if you'd like to ask a question for the Q&A session, do please type in the question box at any time rather than the chat box, because the text scrolls away. So type your question at any time in the question box. So let's begin with what to say at the start of a conference presentation to make a good impression. So first of all, I'd like you to type in the chat box which of these options sound good as introductions. So there's A, B, and C. So A is, hello, my name is X, I come from Japan, I have a BSc from the University of Y, where I'm now doing a PhD, my supervisor is Professor Z, blah, blah, blah. B is, the title of my talk is How to Present Your Research at International Conferences. Please look at this agenda slide for my talk. And C is, international research conferences take place in situ and virtually in multiple disciplines. Researchers share the fruits of their labor to push the envelope. Okay, we have a B. Any others? We have C, A. Actually, we're having many for each one. So actually, it sounds okay. You could actually say A, B, and C, because it sounds like a sequence. Introduction, say what the talk is about, and then start with the actual introduction. So those are good elements, but I would say, okay, more people for C, yes? So thank you for your answers. I would say, actually, A is not quite right, because it's a bit too long and all about, I come from Japan, I have this, I do that, I'm that. It's all about you, it's all about the person, or all about I, and the audience will be bored already. And also, I am now doing a PhD, I am based, in talking, you'd say I'm. So I am sounds a bit too formal or too self-centered. So normally the contractions I'm, your is okay for speaking. If you don't, it actually sounds weird. B is also a bit too, not quite right, because you're just reading the title of your talk. Now, if your presentation, whether it's a poster or oral presentation, is in the abstract book already, people know the title of your talk, because that's how they decide to go to your session. And if you're giving an oral presentation, the slide is probably on the screen anyway, like my slide was on the screen for a few minutes before we started. So people can read it, they know. So paraphrase the title, never read out the title. And then try not to use direct imperatives. Look at this, look at this. So use a different way. And you wouldn't talk about your own agenda slide as if it was the beginning of a meeting. This is my agenda. So B is not quite right. And C is not quite right because the beginning is too formal. It sounds like you're reading from your research paper in situ. And then the second sentence is too informal because we're using idioms and metaphors that not everyone would have heard of. Fruits of the labor, pushing the envelope. So the elements were there in ABC, but let's see how to do it properly. So this would be my suggestion. Hello, I'm X from Professor Z's group at the University of Y in Japan. So that's already your introduction sentence. You don't need any more. I'll be sharing our findings on what speaking styles work best for presenting research to get the most out of conferences. So here we're giving the topic and the findings, the results, the conclusion, what people will get. So something for people to look forward to. So tell them straight away. And then my talk will cover A, B, and C. There's no need to read off the slide or say, this is my agenda. And then we're using everyday words. I'm X, I'll be sharing. So this is a good way to start your presentation. So write out, learn your beginning few sentences. That would already be a good start and make a good first impression, because people will think about how they are going to look forward to your talk, but also they're judging you whether you're a good presenter or not. And also those first few minutes will get people used to your voice as well as your personality. Everyone is from different parts of the world. We all have different accents. So that little bit of introduction gets people used to your voice. So next we talk about what is your message, but also how you say it. So what you say and how to say it, they're both important. So here are a few concepts to think about when you're planning the actual speech, the talking part of your slides. As I said, we already had in webinar 1, the artwork side of slides and posters. So we have the rule of 3 to begin with. You might have heard this. So it's everything is in 3s for a complete triangle. It's the most recognizable shape. It's strong, beginning, middle, end. So that's kind of like the introduction, body, and conclusion of a talk or a paper. Then you might have heard, tell them what you're going to tell them, then tell them, and then tell them what you've told them. So that's what we just had in the introduction. We actually give the message straight away. Don't keep it as a surprise. And then the middle part would be the support and evidence for what you're trying to say. And then the end, of course, would be the conclusion, where you repeat it. It doesn't have to be, well, it shouldn't be a copy-paste of the introduction. So the conclusion should be a paraphrase or a different aspect of what you said in the introduction. And then with them, what's in it for me? That's always going to be what the audience asks itself. And also when you go to a conference, or even when you go to any presentation, go to a movie, anything, you're thinking, oh, what am I going to get out of it? What's their point? What are they trying to say? Why should I care? So that's why I said front load the key point, put the main message at the beginning. So put the conclusion at the beginning, that's fine. For marketers, they want to tell people both the functional and the emotional benefits, not just the list of features. They don't just say, buy our product because it has a big screen, it does this, it does that. They will say what the benefits are for the users. So you can do the same thing in your talk. Another concept is a full circle. So don't think of your story as just one straight line of a story. The beginning has to link to the end somehow. So it's the same as if you go to a movie and the ending is linked to the beginning. You feel whole, you feel a sense of closure that you're satisfied. So the beginning should not only grab attention like a hook, but also anchor and link back. The end should link back to the beginning. So it's a hook and an anchor. We'll see those words again later. So at the end, the audience should know, yes, you promised something and then you delivered. You did answer the question, you solved the problem, or you explained and supported the advice or the recommendation that you gave at the beginning. So it's a sense of fulfillment or reflection, and reinforces the key points. So it does come twice, or as we saw 3 times, beginning, middle, and end. So the key point, the key message is reinforced. People remember that. Now, the last part, my hint is this, framing, because whatever you say at the beginning is going to influence what people think of the rest of the talk. So 4 A's, attitude and approach, affect audiences. So whatever you say, how you say it will stick with the audience till the end, and they'll remember what you said at the beginning. So if you have, and it could be the same fact or message you want to say, but if you say it in a different way or a different angle or a slightly odd perspective, then that will frame the rest of the talk. People will think, oh, he says something odd at the beginning. So also the style, the formality, the seriousness you use, whether it's optimistic or pessimistic or friendly or not friendly, that will already, as we said, be the first impression and what people will remember. And then they'll think, oh, the rest of the talk will also be pessimistic or not friendly. And this goes also for the artwork in your slides and your posters. So it's got to look professional, and colors have meanings too, like red is happy in Asia. And be careful of white. White is pure in the West, but of course, the color of funerals in Asia. So think about fonts, artwork, and colors. So really, literally, like the frame, you don't want to introduce your talk in the wrong way and it doesn't suit or match the contents, or it's just the wrong style. So it's got to be just right. And that goes for the style and branding, maybe your university colors for the frame of your posters and slides. So that leads us to frameworks. So how do you structure what you're saying to make a good impression last for the rest of the talk? So whatever you promised at the beginning, do deliver in a logical way that the audience will expect. Now, of course, we know in journal articles, there's an abstract that has introduction, methods, results, conclusion, and it increases in importance. So people will wait for the conclusion and then they'll read the rest of the paper, and it will go from less important to more important as you go from the introduction to the question and aim, then methods, results, discussion, conclusion. So it matches the abstract. But for a talk, that's a bit boring. It's got to be shorter. So rather than the kind of Christmas tree we see for the journal article, the talk is more like a little bell. Because we give at the beginning, as we said, the conclusion, put it right at the front, then the agenda, and then the introduction, methods, results, and then the conclusion and implications. So grab attention with the beginning, with the key message. So this is where I said people remember what you say and how you said it. That's the primacy effect. If you gave a person a long list of numbers, like a telephone number, they'll probably remember the first and last numbers. So that's the primacy effect, and then the recency effect. So what you say at the beginning does matter. And then we saw before the framing, and there's also the anchoring. Whatever perspective or tone you use at the beginning will stay in the audience's mind. So hold attention then for the rest of the talk. So use an interesting storyline, but always remind people of the agenda as well. We'll see it in my slides that I remind you of the agenda slide. Use logical patterns like an order of importance, like IMRAD, which is introduction, methods, results, discussion, or the problem solution benefit pattern. And then there will be smaller patterns, but again, people will know what you're saying, so they can expect that, for example, in methods, that if you give a process, that one thing will follow another, or in a discussion, you have comparison and contrast, what is similar and what is different. The ending is also important because I said people remember the ending. So that's the recency effect. And also then people expect to hear about, remember, with them, what's in it for me? So what? And then the so what, what's the meaning? And then now what? Where do we go from here? So the ending is what to do in the future. Sometimes we call that the call to action. So give the take-home message, do a good Q&A session, get feedback, network with the audience. And now people think, oh, I get nervous. I present my work and I forget what to say. Actually, the beginning, the presentation isn't like a performance for the actual presentation. It's to prepare for the Q&A session. The Q&A is the most important because you're giving enough context. You can actually ask questions throughout to then get people to talk to you at the end at the Q&A. So again, people say they're very nervous for the Q&A, but actually that's where you would get the feedback from the audience and get good professional input and improve your work, for example, for peer review, for future submission to a journal, for example. So we mentioned logical patterns. So here are some logical patterns, time and process sequence, order of importance, complexity or size, cause and effect or conditions. If something happens, something else happens, comparison and contrast, and whole to parts or general to specific. Now, there's another purpose for presentations, which is to build your own branding and personal reputation. So there's three things here. You have to show you're a subject expert, a technical expert, and then a good communicator, whether it's in posters, slides, or online meetings, or even in journal articles. You have to be a good communicator, be professional. So all of these meet up in the middle. You have to be all three. So of course, you have to show you're ethical and do good research. So here there's a concept of triangulation, a different triangle. So try to use more than one or even more than two different aspects of whatever you're looking at. So if it's social studies, of course, try to have a quantitative aspect and qualitative aspect, and then you have a full picture. The same goes for the methods, the analyses, and then the interpretations and conclusions. People will believe you more if you have more than one angle and more than one type of source, etc. So in that way, then, when you give your talk, people will believe you, and you can be more logical, you can argue your message, be unbiased, and we need to have an engaging talk, engaging Q&A, and the language you use then has to fit the community too. So you're trying to fit into a community, like your research community, as if it's a club, and use the correct language. So for example, everyone now knows what DNA is, but if you were in a group that didn't, you would say something like, oh, this is the blueprint of a cell. But for example, if you were talking to COVID experts, you wouldn't have to say what SARS-CoV-2 is. You wouldn't have to keep on explaining that that's the COVID-19 coronavirus. You can just say SARS-CoV-2. So use the right terminology for the audience. Otherwise, they might think that you don't know or that you're condescending to them. So do study the audience beforehand. And then in that way, they'll believe you, they'll accept you as a member of their research community, and they'll see you as a knowledgeable person who's credible, personable, so friendly and approachable, and respectful, and they'll respect you too. So that's another reason for going to conferences. Now, here are some myths, because sometimes people say, oh, talk as if you're talking to a friend, but not really, because we use language like, oh, it's like, yeah, you know, what do you reckon? What do you think? So that's a bit too casual. So it's more like a audience engagement, conversational style, but you wouldn't really use the same words or volume or speed as if it really was talking to a friend. So that's not quite right. Others say, oh, smile and be happy all the time, but that's not going to really work. It can look annoying. And if you're saying something that's serious, it doesn't look right to have a smile. So smile when you have to, when it fits, especially at the beginning and end when you're talking to the audience. But it's more important to show empathy. So whatever the content and topic is, then of course match it with hand movements, facial gestures. And finally, practice makes perfect is a myth, because nothing is perfect. There's always something that can go wrong. So more than practice makes perfect, I'd prefer to say practice makes progress, or practice means preparedness, and practice builds confidence. So preparedness means imagine things that could go wrong and then try to practice that way. So you know how sports people always train, imagining, visualizing what could happen on the day. So rather than learning something and then reciting it, it's better to learn it as well as you can, so you know what to say, but not like a news script. So focus what you're going to say, be fluent and practice it, and also be flexible, be prepared for what could happen. So it's not really learning, it's more familiarity with your own content. And in that way, when you're performing, it is like a improvisation, then you won't forget what to say. So learn, of course, the key facts and messages and what you have in your illustrations, learn difficult words, how to transition between the slides, but speak naturally, and you don't have to shout, just speak into the mic, unless there's no mic in the room, so practice then projecting a voice. Improve with improv, so do try to improvise when you're practicing, because on the day, this has happened to me, the speaker before you could have gone over time, and then your talk has to be shortened, or the other way around, the speaker before you didn't speak long enough, and so you have more time to fill. Read the room, so when you're presenting live, you can see if people are bored or not, and then you can change the way that you're presenting. And then, of course, in the Q&A, you don't know what people are going to ask you, so you have to improvise there a little bit. But if you know the facts, you can confidently answer the questions. So here are some examples of what style to not use or to use. So this is too formal. A discourse analysis of 500 conference speeches was performed. So instead of that, we can say, we looked at 500 conference speeches. This is too casual. Me and the team took apart 500 speeches. This is too formal. In the present study, it was found that overly formal language predominated among presenters. It's obvious if you're reading from a script or your research paper, so don't do that. Paraphrase it in everyday language. So a better version would be, our main finding was that most of the presenters spoke too formally. This is too casual. The bulk of presenter lingo is like way too formal. This is too formal. In conclusion, it is important that researchers receive appropriate training before international conference presentation. So the normal version would be, what did we conclude? First of all, it's important that researchers get presentation training. And too casual is the bottom line. Researchers go level up before jetting off to a speaking gig. Okay, so the features of the professional but informal style are to use personal pronouns, make it feel personal, more active voice rather than passive, more verbs than nouns, use questions like, what did we conclude? And that acts like a signpost, and contractions like I'm, it's, and simpler words and spoken grammar. So it doesn't have to be perfect written grammar. Now, here's what I mean by the reminder of the agenda slide. And this also helps people give them a rest every 10 minutes or so, give their eyes a rest, show a picture and talk about the picture, show something like this, which is mostly a blank slide. Then you can move on to the next part. So in this part, again, I'll test you. What's a good conference style for speaking? First of all, here's a little quiz. Type in the chat box what words are missing from this sentence. So it's important to use the right speaking style when delivering your, conference presentation. Actually, that was a test because, yes, you're right. Yes, speaking and conference. Now, the way I presented that, is that a good style? Actually, that was like a teacher, wasn't it? So it's slow with pauses to elicit the student to give answers. So it's two-way. So that's fine for teaching, but your conference presentation wouldn't really be that style. How about B? It's important to use the right speaking style when delivering your conference presentation. That sounded like a newsreader. So it's a special style. It's like an urgent factual. There's hardly any time to think about what they said. So how about C? It's important to use the right speaking style when delivering your conference presentation. Yeah, no one's put their hand up because that also is a bit annoying. It's like a show announcer announcing something on stage. It's too exciting, too hyperactive. So that would be annoying. So those styles, maybe a little bit of each might work for interest. But if you did it all the way through a 20-minute presentation, that would be too much. So what style should we use? It should be clear, projected, but natural voice, natural rhythm. So not recited or reading out, not monotone like a robot, not too chatty and not too shouty. So low voice is quite serious, like a newsreader, and then high is quite energetic, like the show announcer. So bits of both, but not all the time. Now, louder, slower, higher is what you do have to practice for important points. So you'll have to stress certain words. So it's louder and slower and higher if it's important. We'll practice that in a minute. And then pause after important points, because that gives time for people to process what you just said and reflect. So you could actually pause before important points because people are waiting for the end of the sentence, or you can pause after important points. And then what I just did there, I repeated it. So repeat or paraphrase important points. That's okay, don't overdo it, but make sure the audience does remember what you want to say. And use hand and facial gestures and eye contact. So even though it's verbal communication, we know that unless you're speaking on a phone, we do use extra forms of communication. Similarly, point to your visuals, talk about your visuals, and that adds to the presentation. So I said you have to match the audience type and the audience knowledge. So how do we do this? So in the actual presentation, I just mentioned visuals. You kind of draw the audience in and you talk about the pictures and it enhances your message. Now, the amount of text should be minimal on your slides, and then use bullet points in your posters. But you might have to actually use more text if you know your audience has English as a second language. But do refer to what you're looking at or pointing to, and then tell people, look at the top picture, the middle picture. So you might not have a laser pointer, you'll have to use your words to show them what you're looking at. But that involves the audience and makes it more interesting. Now you could poll or quiz your audience. It's not usual, but actually for online meetings, you could do that, but it takes a bit of work. You'd have to program it into Zoom or GoTo, or use something like Slido. But you wouldn't normally ask questions in an actual presentation. But with the online one, you could do so if you had a reason, like you did want to find out who in your audience has published something or hasn't published something. You need to know the level of what knowledge to give them. Then if none of them, if all of them, for example, have English as a second language, then you'll know how to moderate what you say. So it could be useful to find out the composition of your audience. And then again, involve your audience, find out their level, and ask them questions, especially in the Q&A session. And during your talk, you can say things like, oh, we use this method, we think it's the best one, but what do you think? Please let me know in the Q&A session. So you're giving them some subjects and topics to ask questions about, or you really sincerely want to know the answer of what an alternative interpretation is, what method to use, ideas for future research. So remember, the Q&A is actually the more important part of a conference presentation. In smaller talks, you could say, please ask me questions as we go along, but only if it's to do with the slide that's showing, and then any general questions reserved to the end. So you can control it that way too. Now, the questions you ask to involve the audience can be indirect. So it could be a mock poll or quiz, or rhetorical questions. So you're not really asking them to put their hands up. You say something like, if I asked you if you had coffee this morning, I think most of you would put your hand up. Or rhetorical question. What's a rhetorical question? That's one that doesn't really need an answer. You're just using it for effect. Another type of rhetorical question is a tag question, but don't overuse tag questions because it can get annoying, can't it? Now, to include the audience, you can say we and us and our or you. So use personal pronouns. And fit the language and knowledge and also the energy of the audience. So if they look sleepy after lunch, then try to make your talk more lively. And then use appropriate hand movements and eye contact. In a room, you could do the eye sweep. So look across the room to make it look like you're talking to everyone, but hold for 3 seconds at the right and middle and then left. So you're not really moving like an owl, but get everyone involved. Or you can use verbs that make people think. So you're not asking them to answer you, but they're thinking, they're answering in their head, like imagine, consider, remember, think. And then finally, talk to the audience in your welcome, in your thanking statement, refer to them. You can ask them, oh, can you hear me at the back of the room? Or you could say something, I'd like to tell you a story. So you are involving the audience. And again, show them and tell them, but you're really showing and demonstrating what you're saying with your slides. And use slide animation, so they're not reading everything. You can reveal bullet points one by one. And finally, talk to the audience to help them through your talk by saying what you're going to say. So if you're going to ask them a question, say, I want to ask you a question. So by doing that and guiding them through your talk, you're showing that you care about your audience. So this means when you're planning your work, you really have to think about your audience. So this means think about the purpose, the context, and the audience, and then what your message should be to make the audience feel involved. Now, there will be things related to the venue, the room itself, how big your poster is, how much time you have, whether the questions are going to be right at the end after everybody has spoken, or whether it's a small room and there's no mic, or whether it's an online meeting and then you have to answer questions from the question box rather than people actually asking you. So lots of technical things to do with the venue. But for the audience, there are things like, what's the purpose of the meeting? What's the topic and aims and scope? Is it for about theory? Is it about practice? Are people there to network, or are they there to learn? And then is your message more to inform people or persuade or entertain or motivate? The level of knowledge of the audience matters, because then you have to give more background or theory if they don't know the topic, or define terms and use a variety of things for them to see your message. So speaking as well as pictures. For international audiences, you have to speak clearly and moderate your language, use simpler words, avoid jargon and abbreviations, and then repeat certain things, signaling also what you're saying so people know what's coming up. Now, you could be unlucky and have a hostile audience that you know is full of older professors who will disagree with you, or your area is a new one, or actually your message is against current thought. So you'll then need more evidence and more argumentation. You'll need to repeat certain points again, elaborate, and anticipate people's objections, especially in the Q&A. So audience analysis is very important when you're preparing. Again, that will help you be confident to present in the actual real thing. So something else about keeping audience attention is, of course, having a good story. So in my other webinar on science communication, research communication, we've seen this. Again, the rule of three, so beginning, middle, end. So the introduction, maybe a complicating factor, and then the climax of your story, and then the resolution and lessons learned. That's the coda. So as well as telling the story, talk about the human side, about why you researched a certain topic, what you did, what you found unexpected, surprising, give recommendations for society, what the societal impact is. So involve people and talk about the human side. So there should be some emotion also in a talk that will keep it interesting. So if you go into PowerPoint and then under view, there is a slide sorter view like this, where it's easy to move your slides around as if they are post-it notes. So in that case, when you have a draft or even when you finished your presentation, it's easy to move around what elements work best to make a good flowing story and to keep it interesting, and to insert, for example, slides about the human side of your story. Now, for holding attention, you need to have little signpost signal words to warn people what you're doing. So rather than just fact, 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 it's better to warn people with words like this. So for processes, first, second, third. For other orders, for example, order of importance, so the most important, the least important. For cause and effect, of course, you'd use things like as a result, it follows that. Now, therefore and hence are a little bit formal, but they could be useful in a science presentation if you're presenting a logical sequence of something. But thus maybe THUS, maybe a bit too formal for speaking. For comparison and contrast, you talk about what's similar, so similarly, likewise, and you'll talk about what's different, by contrast, unlike. And then for whole to parts, you can say at the end, taken together, overall, or in conclusion, in summary. Signal words can signal the actual message of your story. So if you're adding more information, you can say in addition, on top of that, what's more. So those you wouldn't put in writing in your article, what's more, plus, but it's okay for speaking. Conversely, furthermore, moreover, and additionally are too formal for speaking. For defining and repeating things in different ways. So there's in other words, that means that, to put it simply, essentially, and then opposites and contrasts on the one hand, on the other hand, either or, neither nor. However, that's a bit formal, but it can have a special effect because it's a longer word than but. So you can say, but something, something. But if you say, however, and then pause, that's actually a good turning point of a story. Too formal are nevertheless, nonetheless, despite, and in spite of. For examples, you can say, for example, or there are two types of something. So the there is, there are is actually quite useful for presentations. And then for different parts of something and what's more important, you can again say there are 4 parts to something. The most important is, especially, notably. Now, to change topic, you can also use special phrases. Don't just jump about. So topic control is important. So to change topic, moving on. So we've just talked about something. Let's now talk about something else. Or the word now is quite good. It doesn't really mean time now. It just means, oh, I'm going to change topic. Now we turn to the results. And asking a question is good. So what did we find? So that's where the rhetorical questions are useful. Reminding people, because there's not like a book that they can go back to for something earlier. So you might have to remind them of what you said earlier. So remember in section 1, we looked at something. Earlier I said, if you recall. So anticipate if the audience has forgotten what you said and then remind them with some reminder words. Similarly, summarizing after each section or definitely at the end. So far, we've seen that my main point is, in summary, there are 3 key points. Repeat things, so I'll, or delay it. So I'll come back to this topic later, or this point bears repeating, or in this model we see again. So remind people of what they might be thinking or what you've shown them. So again, it's all to do with reinforcement and linking of what they're seeing, what they're hearing, and what they're thinking. And then at the end, to conclude, you can say things like, I'd like to finish with these take-home messages. Or remember, it's like an article, so you do have to give limitations, future steps, and potential uses. Or, of course, for Q&A, you say, I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have. Finally, there's some pointing phrases for your slides and posters. So introduce what you want to point to. What did we find? What were our results? Or the next section will show this. Locate on the picture what you're talking about. So on the top left, bottom right. And then highlight features. This arrow is pointing to the nucleus. So you talk about this, the demonstrative pronoun this. You wouldn't really say that picture. So it's actually this and here, not there. So this picture here shows. And then you can compare things in your illustrations and say what, so this will take the place of the legend, really. Say what the picture is showing. So here we see groups A and B had a similar X, or they are or aren't statistically significant. And then try to explain as well what people are seeing. So the level of X here rises at this point because, or we think the plateau here happened because. Okay, so finally, let's go to some tips for confident presenting. So we've spoken about engaging the audience, keeping them interested, using signal phrases so that they're following your story. So for the final part, let's begin with some hand signals. So of course, don't overdo it. And in online, it's very easy to put your hands too close to the camera. So keep your hands close, but use your hands in a clever way, in a useful way. So in the chat box, please can you type, if you know any of these, A, B, C, D, E, F, or G, tell me your letter, tell me what you think is going to be the international universal meaning. So these are hand gestures you can use in a live meeting, whether it's presentation or poster or online meeting. Online, it's you have to test it out. Watch yourself in the camera so you know the area that you can move your hands. So what do these gestures mean? Yes, A is, of course, yes, A is counting. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Or if you've got 3 points, you can say the first point, the second point, the third point. Now, B, doing this, it could be to offer something to the audience or pointing. Now in Asia, in Japan, it's rude to point like in C. So they will point with a palm like this. Or going up, increase. So you can add some movement as well. So that means increasing level. C is pointing, but a little bit blaming, like you did something. But you can use your index finger if you're saying, oh, this is an important point, remember. So that's okay. So a vertical one is okay. D is more like power. Yes, E is good, bad. And F, a little bit. And then the opposite would be a lot. And then G would be something to do with linking together. So you can use those types of things if your message matches those. So this means, of course, beyond words, you can use gestures, you can use your voice also, and it adds to the meaning of what you're saying. You're not really an audio book and you're there live, people can see you. So mean what you say, and then the next slide we'll say what you mean. So mean what you say because your actions have to match. So this will show that you're confident. So open body language means that you're standing on the stage and you're not folding your arms and crossing your legs. So open means you're vulnerable, but it actually is more welcoming. Have an upright posture, eye contact without staring at specific people, and then keep your hands close to your body, or there's an area here where you can move, but then put your hands back down to your waist. The neutral position, again, it's like the shouting thing. If you do it all the time, it's too much. So if you do too much, it's too much. And then match whatever you're saying to look natural. Now the voice, or we say paralanguage. So para is Greek for beyond. Beyond language is not the words, but the voice quality. So for example, stressing. Now we saw before, important words start higher, are louder, and are slower. Statements end with a high falling intonation, especially at the ends of sentences. Remember, the ends of sentences are the important bits where the main news will be. So it will be a statement like that. And did you know that general questions rise at the end? And also, if you're unfinished, you can rise, and then the end of the sentence will have a falling tone. So be careful though, if you rise at the end of the sentence, people will think it's a question. So this is up talk or up speak. If you keep doing that, you don't look confident because everything is like a question and you're not sure. So be careful if you have a habit of doing that. In some accents do that, but in an international audience, beware that usually people expect downwards for statements. And which questions fall at the end? So it's not a statement, but it's a WH question. So information seeking questions, when, what, why, who, where, how, they will fall, they don't rise. And then items in the list go up, have pauses, but they fall on the last one. Again, that's what people will expect. And then change topics by pausing and then using a louder, high-falling tone for keywords. So here's an example. Let's see how to use speech accuracy and fluency to say what you mean. So clear pronunciation is important. Be careful that nouns and verbs are different, even for the same word. We have increase for the noun, but increase for the verb. Project or project for work as a noun, but project as a verb to mean throw forward. Separate as the adjective, but separate for the verb. Recover to cover again, as opposed to recover to find something or to get better from an illness. Resign to sign again, and resign, the opposite. And then for different syllables, there are different stresses: analyze, analysis, analytical, analytically. And then the stress will change the meaning. So a greenhouse is a house that's green, but a greenhouse is where you keep vegetables or grow vegetables. Similarly, glass, glass house, and glass house. And then some words that I have some colleagues that have difficulties saying. So ambiguity, lounge, launch, protein, colloquial, and then silent letters: whistle, write, subtle. So the B is subtle in subtle. And then consonant clusters: sixth. And then words like 13 and 30. It's very important if you're giving data. So you might have to say 13, 1, 3, 30, 3, 0. And then there's connected speech when you talk naturally. So English is not word by word like a robot. So try to sound natural. English is stress timed. So words are stressed for their importance or special contrast. And try to speak in chunks rather than to separate every word like a robot, And some fast words have weak forms and are quieter. So some, we don't say some, have, and are. Some fast words have weak forms and are quieter. And did you know that your words can blend? So there are some extra letters there. Did you know that your words can blend? It actually sounds like an M, can blend. And extra sounds can appear in between words. For example, the idea is to eat less. So appear in, there's the R. The idea, there's a Y. The idea is, there's an R there. To eat less, there's a W. Now, let's finally go to Q&A. Hopefully you'll be lucky and you can answer the questions because you've practiced them. So listen though. You can say things like, oh, I didn't catch the whole question, please repeat it. So that's L. U is for understand the question. So you can say, oh, I'm not sure if you're asking about this or that. Could you clarify, please? And then remember to thank the person. Thank you for your question. Thank you for raising that point. C is for check. Everyone understands. For example, in the Q&A box, you can read out the question, or if someone asks you a question that was unclear or was too quiet, then you can say it for the rest of the audience. So the question here is, or you can summarize if there's lots of points. You can say, oh, there are 2 issues here that I want to talk about. K is for know what to say. So answer the question with evidence. So of course, basically yes, actually no. Complicated answers, yes and no. You can say my initial answer is yes, or you can say, oh, it depends, or the evidence so far indicates. Or if someone asks you to clarify something in your talk, you can say, oh, this was mentioned in my talk, so I'd like to take this opportunity to clarify, to elaborate, and have some extra slides, or in your QR code of your poster, have some extra information for people to look at. And Y is for yield the floor. So bounce it back to the audience. You can say, oh, I hope that answers the question. Does that answer the question? We have time for 1 more question, 2 more questions. Now, you might be unlucky, unfortunately, and get some difficult questions. So it could be about unexpected results or negative parts of your results, or someone might just want to be negative. So in this case, though, practice answering about limitations. You can say, thank you, but that limitation didn't affect the validity. and then say how you would improve it in the future. Unknown things that you don't know yet, you can say, oh, we didn't look at that aspect, or give a so far answer based on X. It's plausible that. So it's usually don't try to say, oh, I don't know, because that doesn't look good. So you can say, I don't know yet, we don't have the answer yet, or you can even say, oh, I'll get back to you. So I'll get back to you, we can discuss it at lunch. Now, if the person asking the question is wrong, or they're trying to say that there's a gap in your knowledge, then you can say, oh, we didn't use that method here because, or I think those estimates only apply to this, but not that. So you can explain why, if they think there's a mistake or there's a gap in the knowledge, you can either admit it and then moderate your answer, or you can say, oh no, that doesn't apply in this case. And then finally, if someone is really disagreeing with you, you can use the yes and rather than the yes but. So agree back with them to a certain extent. So I can see why you say that. I agree up to a certain point. You might be right. Our data show this, or both models can be valid. Now, you can use this model to help you prepare so that you can predict what horrible questions might come up. So for every claim you make, there will be some evidence, but it would be based on a warrant with backing, and the audience might have an opposite view. So bear that in mind, and you might have to modify or qualify your claim a little bit. So this is the Toolman model of argumentation, rather than a strong claim or findings definitively show. And you can have a weaker claim, we'll see in a minute. So the grounds from these results, the warrant, we assumed that, the backing, the literature shows, the rebuttal, some might say the opposite, and then you qualify your claim. So generally, typically, or our findings suggest or indicate. So it's a little bit weaker rather than our findings definitely show. So modify your language, think of the argumentation structure. And the other thing also is to keep up to date with the literature, even after you submitted your abstract. Someone will have read the latest literature to maybe have a question about it. So make sure that you're also prepared and you can answer confidently. So finally, here are some tips, and then we'll have a few questions at the end. So check the guidelines of the conference for the requirements and the deadlines. Some only allow you to present original work that hasn't been published before. You'll see what the guidelines are for presenting and publishing your work in the conference supplement or conference proceedings, but be careful of conferences that are a con and predatory journals. So do look at the lists of questions and checklists in Think, Check, Attend and Think, Check, Submit. Prepare well and match the audience to your message. Now, do allow enough time to prepare and make your slides. Minimum is about 1 hour per slide. And then include different types of artwork in your slides and posters for variety. And then for slides, you can time it for either a minute or 2 minutes, but then include the timing in your practice. So don't forget to have time to practice as well, and practice your pronunciation, practice the key bits like the beginning, the end, the key messages, topic transitions, how to paraphrase and improvise and say things in different ways. So it's best to prepare actually in your mind a short version and a long version. Remember, if the person before you spoke too long or too short, then you'll be able to have a short version and a long version. And then practice some FAQs, frequently asked questions that you'll likely be asked in the Q&A section. Develop your voice and expression. Practice some phrases for the talk, but also networking, chit chat, small talk, and make checklists and have a ritual for example, to calm your nerves. So take deep breaths and then hold your breath. Always have a backup plan as well. Something might go wrong. So you can imagine what could go wrong. The laser pointer might not work. The screen might not work. Appear confident. So take deep breaths if something does go wrong. Take a pause to gather your thoughts. Sound natural, especially if you are reading from a script. So you could have a script script in your PowerPoint presenter view, but then don't read it out like the news, and then don't rush. Keep your posture upright, and then don't apologize in advance. Don't say, oh, I'm sorry, my English is going to be poor. You don't need to do that. Whoops. And finally, know your stage, whether your stage is your desk or whether it is a stage in a room. Practice using the things and getting used to the screen. Have a clock. So I have a clock as well. And have some water. Check your appearance, dress smartly. Check your body language. And be collegial and friendly on stage. Have eye contact and look at someone you know, or at least a friendly face for 3 seconds, so that you are looking at the audience, and adjust your delivery to what the audience is doing. If they're bored, try to sound more interesting. If it's after lunch, sound more energetic. So again, there's that kind of interaction. The audience will know that you are caring, that you're aware of them, and then you're confident enough to adjust your presentation. You're not just doing what you've practiced and you're just giving a performance and you don't care what the audience does. So do show the two-way awareness and care for your audience. Use everything, your whole body, so your speech, your eyes, your hands, and then that will add to a confident presentation. So we do have some time, about 5 minutes, for questions. So we've looked at what to say in a conference at the beginning and the middle and the end, and we've looked at some phrases as well as non-verbal tips for confident presentations and the Q&A session. So our Q&A session now is going to start. So type your questions in the Q&A. There's also an email address on this slide where you can email us if you have any comments or ideas for future webinars. So do please type your questions. So small talk for, have some phrases for small talk. What I meant was, if someone comes to your poster and you can say, oh, would you like a printout of my slides? Or, oh, can I give you my name card? So little things like that, because the point is to network throughout your presentation, not just to present one way. The main point is actually to network, because you want to have future colleagues, future boss, an editor of a journal that you can talk to submit your paper to, ideas for future research, how to improve your paper for publication. There's a question, how can you please give more advice for time management? So basically you just have to time it in your practice. So have busy slides, not busy slides. Know if it's a 1-minute slide, a 2-minute slide. You might have heard of there's a type of talk, gutta percha or something like that, where you can only have a few seconds per slide. So maybe you do that to yourself, put your timer on, so you only have 1 minute per slide. So you do have to keep looking at the clock, keep looking at your watch, your timer, and practice. But don't just skip ahead. You just have to summarize if you're behind. So yeah, do practice the time management part. You might have to delete slides, or rather than delete, you can do hide in PowerPoint. But that was my point about the view mode in PowerPoint, to look at the view of the whole storyline, and then you'll know whether the story still makes sense if you do hide, delete one slide. So that's a good point. Time management of slides is important. For posters too, you might have a 5-minute speech ready, but then your guest will only have 2 minutes. So you do have to improvise and have a short version and long version of your talk. Another question, oh, could you share the PowerPoint? Yes, the handouts and the PowerPoints will be online. So this recording will be online. Someone did ask also what software to use for making slides and posters. So I didn't talk about that in my other webinars, but software for posters would be, it could be PowerPoint at high resolution, but there's also InDesign, Illustrator, Photoshop. And then for slides, there's PowerPoint, there's Prezi, Keynote, Google Slides, and then there's either free but also paid for the premium service for things like Canva, Visme, Slides, Ludus, Slidebean, and Zoho Show. We can go online and there will be some lists of top 10 best packages, best software for slides, but PowerPoint's fine. So any other questions? We have time for maybe another question or so. Yes, the ritual I meant for preparing would be like breathing exercises or voice exercises to get used to talking. So you can say A, E, I, O, U, say the vowels, or A, E, O, U, Ma, Mo, Mi, Mo, Mu, use different letters. Or to not be nervous, you can count, but don't count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So things I've read, you can count even numbers or odd. That will make your mind, take your mind off being nervous. So 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and then backwards, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, and then you'll be less nervous. So that's what I mean by a ritual. You see people in Olympic sports, they have headphones listening to music, they have a ritual. You can look at a family photo on your phone, make yourself feel confident and happy. So I hope I've given you enough tips for confidence, for practicing, for preparing for your speech, and preparing for Q&A. Okay, a last point. 2 more points. Someone says, do we need animations? So animations, I don't really mean cartoons. I mean point-by-point bullet points. So that's fine to control the reading speed. Of course, not too many per slide. And someone else has asked, is it okay to walk about on stage? If you have a fixed podium lectern, then your mic will be there. So you have to talk into the mic, and then be careful that you don't look away. When you're looking at your slides, don't talk at the slides, because you won't be facing the mic anymore. So remind yourself of the slide, then go back to the mic. Otherwise, you can't walk about if it's fixed. If you have a clip-on mic or a handheld mic, you can walk about. But again, the same as everything else, not too much. So you're not going to be walking the whole journey. You just walk around in maybe a square meter in a limited way to add interest. So if you see TED Talks on YouTube, there's always a red circle or red square mat. That's about a meter. They must have a rule that they keep within that mat, the 1 meter mat. So you can do the same. Okay, no more questions. Thank you. They were very good questions. And thank you for your time. And because our hour now has come to an end. So I'd like to thank you for joining this webinar, and the recording will be made available soon. And meanwhile, you can find other webinars and free educational resources at the asiaedit.com website. As I said, please email us if you have ideas for future webinars. So I hope you found this webinar useful. Until next time, I wish you success, goodbye, and stay safe.